Hallo und herzlich willkommen. Mein Name ist Christiane Wirz. Ich bin Coach und Autorin aus Köln und weiß, wie sich etwas aus Krisen machen lässt. Heute bin ich verbunden mit David Crisp. David Crisp ist, er wird es gleich selbst vorstellen, ist jemand, der im Diversity und Inclusion Feld aktiv ist, schon seit einigen Jahren. Er lebt mit bestimmten Diagnosen, also Autismus-Spektrum, und versucht sich für das Verständnis von diesen speziellen Neigungen einzusetzen und arbeitet da als Coach, arbeitet mit Unternehmen und arbeitet auch als Speaker. Hi, David. I just introduced you a little bit. I said that you are working in the D&I field, that you're a speaker, a coach, and that you're working with people in companies that want to know more about autism. And
that's correct. Yeah, I'll try a little bit of German. It's very limited. I haven't done this for a number of years now. So, guten Tag. Mein Name ist David Crisp, and ich bin autistic. How was that?
That was wonderful, David.
And even though as a nation, us English people don't make the effort, I think it's a very lazy English trait, British trait, to not learn foreign languages. It's particularly bad because a lot of our language does come from Germany, from German, French, Latin, Norse. So it's I am ashamed for myself, but also ashamed for my entire nation that very few people learn German. I was learning it at school, but it was choice of that or science. So I wanted to do both, but I had to carry on doing French instead, which I didn't like. But there we go.
So welcome, David.
Thank you.
Willkommen, David. And when we will start a little bit different, because you have been very kind and very empathetic to our podcast listeners. And a lot of people think that people from the autism spectrum are people that are just sitting somewhere in the corner, don't like to talk with others, don't feel with others, are kind of frozen. What about that, David?
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions and myths around autism, particularly lack of empathy. I blame a certain Professor Simon Baron-Cohen from Cambridge University for a lot of that. I have met autistic people that do lack empathy, but generally it's more lack of, I used to call it social imagination, a lack of understanding of how our emotions and other people's emotions relate to one another. Like, for example, if you were crying right now, I would notice you were crying, but might not necessarily understand why unless you really explained it. I might not think I might not know that I may have said something that offended you, not necessarily know. But obviously, as you get older and you're autistic, you learn from mistakes. You learn through experience as well. And also, in my case, I was the youngest child in my family, so I've learned some social skills and emotional skills from good or bad, from my siblings and my elderly parents. So there's a lot from there as well. But I think some autistic people, I consider myself on this, are not Dr. Spock or Mr. Spock, sorry, or Data from Star Trek, or those classical, or Sheldon, the classical sort of autistic type models. Many of us are hyper emotional, if anything. If I see something terrible on the news, like 82, the massive famine in Africa that started, 84 that started the Band-Aid and Live Aid movement, very, very upset with that. I cried the first time I saw the original King Kong. I cried when I saw the remake, because not the more modern one, 78, because it was so bad a movie rather than anything. But I will cry at a sad movie, I'll get upset and things like that. And generally, we sometimes get very emotional about an object or possession. Sometimes it can be a big issue rather than a small issue. A lot of autistic people are very, very strong advocates for social justice. If they don't like somebody, it's nothing to do with race or colour. It's characters and behaviours and characteristics. Someone might be too loud for them, or someone not be trustworthy. They'll learn, I don't like that person because from what I've gathered, they're not trustworthy or reliable. Rather than the normal prejudices that a lot of neurotypical people have. So it's, and I'm certain that case. And again, it's generalisation, but a lot of autistic people actually find other cultures interesting because they're lost in their own culture to a certain extent. And as you think of at the moment, you're doing really well understanding my English. I'm doing not so well understanding your German, but and again with autism, it's a language difference. We don't pick up every word maybe in a sentence, and like what we're doing now, this is more social communication rather than formative communication, such as, would you like a cup of tea, David? Yes, I'm fine. Or how are you, David? I'm fine. But anything beyond that is harder because you don't know how the conversation is going to go, where it's going to lead, where it's going to end, what the start and end point and middle point is going to be. So those conversations have a life of their own, can be very, very difficult for people like myself. So, and emotionally, it can be quite difficult because you don't really know if somebody's crying. They could be crying because they're laughing so much. So even things like tears can be very confusing. It could even be, they may even be crying because they've got a streaming cold and they've sneezed so much it's made their eyes water. So there's a third reason then why somebody might be leaking tears. So again, it's those confusing things that kind of quite difficult. And during the pandemic, it's made even worse by the wearing of a mask. If all you see is a person's eyes and you see most of the face is gone, how can you can tell maybe someone's happy or sad, but if someone's angry or grumpy, which is quite similar, sad or angry, very, very difficult unless, even if they're speaking sometimes, to know exactly what they're thinking, because the face isn't even giving you any clues. That's even if you can read faces, which I've learned how to do, but it's very, very difficult then. And if half the face isn't there, you can imagine it's difficult. It's difficult because you're relying on subtleties of eye shape and forehead, which is very, very difficult anyway. And so and also part of autism, I think, is trying to understand. Some people are face blind, but myself, I've got a brilliant memory for faces, but with masks, it's impossible. Every face looks the same, so that makes it even harder as well. If someone's talking to me, I think, and it might be the same for them. You think, who is that person? Because because you can't even remember where you've seen that person, because all you can see is half the face. So it's very, very difficult. So there's a lot of issues around emotions and communication there as well. But some people like myself, I think we're in any way, we're possibly too emotional sometimes. We can't control our own emotions. So something that might upset one person may cause a massive meltdown for us, and something that you think would hurt us wouldn't. For example, my daughter's recently been in hospital. Yes, it was stressful. She was having lots of seizures, was really quite poorly. But my wife was the one in more emotional state. I wasn't. But if it had been something more, I don't know, something had gone wrong in the house, like the Hoover didn't work, or the vacuum cleaner, or the television reception was going silly, that to me would be a massive, massive thing. I like Doctor Who. If there's a problem with Doctor Who being on late, or somebody rings up and that's on, it's like end of the world. And it's a bigger thing than maybe somebody being in hospital to me, because I think practically, it's kind of like, well, this is, and so again, it's a very, very different thing, and everyone's unique, but the feelings are the same, but you might be attached to different things. I once met a young man that was in the deep depths of really severe grieving, and it took us a long time. We thought maybe his mother died or his gran had died or something like that, and it was just a favourite character on the TV sci-fi show Heroes had died, and because he invested a lot of emotional energy into that character, almost like a friend. When that character was killed off, it was a full-on bereavement, like he'd lost a member of his own family. Almost like when you've lost a pet, but even bigger. It's and other people couldn't understand it, but I could perfectly understand where it was coming from. How dare they kill him off? He was my friend, because he had no real friends. You invest time and energy, don't you, in something that is maybe superficial to everybody else, but to us, it's not.
Mm-hmm. David, give us a little bit more hints who you are. What is your age? Where you're living? I mean, you come from the UK, but give us a little bit more data.
I'm 55, or if you reverse the numbers, 55. And I'm from the UK, from England, and born and raised in Northamptomshire, which is the middle of England. If you can imagine, everyone knows that the UK is an island, or Great Britain is an island. Well, I'm about as far as it's possible to be from the sea. The nearest place from us from the sea is 80 odd miles in any direction. So it is right at the centre of England.
In the heart.
Right in the heart of England, yes. Yeah. So if you know East Midlands, we're sort of to the west of East England, but not quite in the West Midlands. So it's sort of dead on spot. I think if you was to draw an X from the top left, top north, right down to and vice versa, we'd be more or less in the middle there, not quite, but more or less down there. So we're there, and I've lived here all my life, apart from 3 years when I lived not that a lot far away in Leicester when I was studying to be a nurse, but for reasons that I now know were an autistic meltdown, but didn't know that at the time. I didn't qualify. So it's living quite a small town, which was originally a manufacturing town for shoes, and like a one product town, but there were lots of factories rather than just one employer. Gradual decline, and then what's happened in recent years is that we've now got the largest shopping centre, I think, outdoor shopping centre in the UK, suddenly built in this tiny little outskirts of this tiny little town. So it's been totally rejuvenated, which is very, very interesting. And it's the last thing you would expect for a tiny little town like us to have, but it's been good. So it's interesting. And the best part about it is because we're in the middle of the UK, we can go anywhere quite quickly. London is an hour, Birmingham's an hour, East Coast 2 hours, West Coast 2 hours. So it's the transport. So the transport links are really, really good. It's just there's not a lot happening in the county really, but it is good from that point of view.
David, tell us a little bit. How was your, let's say, autism story? You already mentioned that there has been times, or there had been a time that you have not been diagnosed. Tell us a little bit about that, and tell us the advantages and maybe disadvantages of having a diagnosis.
Right. But the situation is that I'm at the higher end of autism, which would be called Asperger syndrome. I know the term is now being phased out. And so the reason why I wasn't diagnosed as a child was because that didn't exist as a diagnosis in the 1970s and 80s. It was only later when people like Dr. Lorna Wing coined the phrase. So I would have just been there as an aloof, shy, quiet, child, rather, maybe I suppose these days they call you a geek or a nerd or whatever the German equivalent is. I was sort of person. But I was diagnosed because of issues with my daughter, but that she was going through the process of being assessed, and there was lots of barriers. People were saying, well, because she's female, she didn't behave in the same way as a boy would, and lots of conflicts with the medical profession, etc. And it was her psychiatrist that said, you like your facts. If they said they were going to do something, didn't do it. I said, there you go. There's a piece of paper there. You said you were going to do this. Oh, they say you're not. I don't think she's autistic. Well, you said that a year ago. She was. Why aren't you assessing her then? It kind of like, well, that was then. Well, no, because if she is, it ain't going to go away. She either is or she isn't. It would answer questions for you as well as for us. But no, they weren't interested. So because of that, she pushed for me to be diagnosed, which I did when I was 42, so that's 2007. My son was then diagnosed a few months later, and my daughter, because she has lots of co-occurring conditions, and because of the background where doctors were doubting that she was as disabled as she was and is now, that made it harder. So she wasn't diagnosed. She was 15 and a half, and by then she'd had every diagnostic label you could have other than autism. But it's kind of like, I describe it as saying somebody's just finally diagnose someone as diabetic, but after you've ticked all the right, the blood sugar, the sugar in urine, thirst, all those sort of symptoms, put them all together, and you think, well, one word is diabetic. And then for her, it was autism. It was so obvious. And when she was diagnosed by one of the leading experts in the UK, Judith Gould, she said it was a real no-brainer. In fact, I hope this will come across okay in translation, but she actually said, well, if I come across a girl that's got web feet, waterproof feathers, swims a lot, quacks, flies, and waddles, then it's more than likely a duck. So you kind of like, well, by probabilities alone, it was clearly obvious, but she said, but we had to do the formal process. I said, I could have just done it over the phone with the information we already have, but I have to do that. So that was very interesting. So, but for me, it didn't make a great difference in a way, because I was already married, already a father, but I had a history of depression, and it made that easier because I was understanding why I found hard to make friends or keep friends or have friends. And I know it's my own detriment, keep them in little boxes. So then if I moved from a job to a job, I didn't keep those friendships up. So then I had to start all over again, which was hard because I find it hard in the first place. So it's gone then, and there's lots of angst and regrets over that, which I can't really do a lot about. But also, my wife was able to understand how my particular special interests or obsessions, depending on how we view it, why they were a need rather than just a want. If you saw my living room a few years ago, it was covered in Doctor Who stuff, and people used to visit and say, well, what part of this, is any part of this living room your wife's? Is any part, my wife's name's Jermaine, does any of this belong to Jermaine? It's almost like a bachelor pad. So I learned, and I wasn't doing anything to be selfish. It just didn't occur to me. It's kind of like, I like those things near to me, but didn't realise that maybe she might like something downstairs that says she lives here too. She's not a sitting tenant. It's my wife, but so and it made us understand each other better, which was very, very helpful.
This sounds really nice, and I especially I like this picture of the duck. Yeah, this leads us a little bit to the neurodiverse approach or neurodistinct approach that you just that for sure you're fighting for. Yeah, maybe you can just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I had to. I mean, it's only the last couple of years. I know it's been banding around for a few years, but it's only the last couple of years I really got to know the term neurodivergent, and I really love it because not everyone is autistic or diagnosed as autistic will necessarily want to say something to somebody they're autistic, because the other person may have perceptions. Oh, you're like Rain Man, you're like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, or you're like I don't know, you're like Einstein. They're very, very straight and very, very mathematical genius. Or you're brilliant like Bill Gates on IT. But no, they're the same as anybody else. There's a broad spectrum of who we are, in the same way that there is of people that aren't autistic. But neurodivergent, because it covers not just autism, but also covers things like ADHD, dyslexia, and things like that, which it's basically anyone whose brain's wired differently to the mainstream, shall we say. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're disabled, although some people are learning disabled or autistic. It just means that you're different. And in the same way that, and I love the word, because diversity because it's been used so many times for race and for ethnicity as well, and even in religion, then it shows it's a much more accepting word, shall I say. I think we need to move more away from autism awareness, people know it exists, to more accepting people for who they are, not trying to change them. Yes, help them so they can function in society, but not change the essence of who they are, which is what they've always tried to do in the past. We will force you to make eye contact. In the same way, years ago, even when I was at school in England in the 1970s, if you were left-handed, the teacher would tap you on the hand with a ruler until you wrote with the right hand. But of course, you're going against what your brain's wired to do. And it's a similar sort of thing that they've done with autism over the past. It's kind of like, rather than let person be themselves, and yes, there are certain behaviours you don't want to do in public, but there are ways you can adapt those behaviours so they're less socially inappropriate. Even if it's just saying, well, you do that behaviour in your own room, or you do something different instead of biting yourself, maybe bite an object, so you're not self-harming. There's lots of ways around it, but you're not stopping the behaviour or therefore encouraging that, so that person becomes very anxious or depressed later in life because they've not been able to be themselves. And I think, and that term's really, really good, because if you say neurodivergent, people don't have to say, well, it doesn't necessarily mean what you are. And it's like if somebody says they're disabled, it doesn't necessarily mean that, do you need to know what or if they're wheelchair bound, do you really need to know why they're in a wheelchair? You just accept they are. And it's those sort of things. And also, so I think it's much better. I'm not, when some people
it shows more like when we still use the duck image, it sounds more like why do you want to force the duck maybe to climb a mountain?
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
Why should an eagle dive in the deep sea or something like that?
Yeah.
Or why should he be in the hen house? This is just not working.
No,
but on the other hand, it can work that let's say in a jungle there is place for the tiger, there's place for the there's place for the snake, there's place for all these animals, and in a way they are working together that the jungle is functioning, and that the jungle is as wonderful, colorful as it is, and because of that I really like this approach, because it's not hurting anybody. It's not hurting the so-called normal. It's just telling that we are wonderfully different in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe in some way, I think everybody may be a touch neurodivergent. I don't want to be necessarily autistic, because everyone's unique anyway. That's why they use the term neurotypical. It's like, look, as close as you can get to using the word normal, because what is normal? There is no normal, is there really? Everyone's, society determines that rather than an individual. What's maybe acceptable behaviour in Germany when you're out for a meal might be very different in the UK, because of your culture. It doesn't necessarily, so again, there's a cultural differences as well, that society decides what is normal, which is much better, which is why neurodivergent I think is a good idea, because it doesn't describe what is normal or what is abnormal, just what's different, what's sort of slightly, we have this English expression, left of centre, maybe a little bit different, but does it matter? It's like it's like if someone drives a Renault, does it mean that and somebody else drives a Citroen, or in Germany someone drives a Volvo, or somebody drives a BMW? Does it? Yes, they're status symbols, maybe the BMW, maybe, but in essence, they're both cars. They're both four wheels to take from A to B. So does it really matter? It doesn't really, other than what society decides or personal preferences decide.
I want to finish it now, David, with the crisis aspect. And if you really can underwrite that all that you went through, all the troubles with your children being diagnosed, and the troubles and the depression you had yourself, it really was worth it? Is there something that comes out of that?
In retrospect, yes. At the time, maybe not. It was, but the depression happened quite before even the children died. In fact, even before my daughter was born, I only had my son then. It was really, really quite bad. And I was trying to get back into care work and couldn't. I had a door slammed in my face and was in a dead-end job, and I was being bullied terribly by my boss. Very, very, very unpleasant chap. And one day, I don't know why, I must have said the wrong thing. I still don't know what I said to him, but he sent me home like a child. And I was 30, 31, being sent home from work like a light schoolboy. And I thought, and now I know why, because of the autism, but I couldn't understand. He never said, does that mean I'd lost my job? Did it mean go home and come back tomorrow? Did it mean that's you're finished in this job? Don't come. He didn't make any of that clear, and I think for anybody would have found it difficult. But now I know why I made it worse. So I'm born like a massive meltdown. My son was a baby, and my wife was obviously full time looking after him. So I had to think, well, what am I going to do for money? What am I going to do for this? And massive. And I was already on antidepressants anyway, and I took a load of them and a bottle of whiskey, because I knew whiskey's I like the taste of it, but also I know it's going to be quite effective. I'm just going to go to sleep if I take a whole bottle and etc. But fortunately, my wife's first name turned with the GP at the time. Was a lovely chap. He's retired now, and he just came to the house and basically gave me something to make me sick, so I didn't have to go anywhere or anything like that. But the funny thing is, and looking back, I still can't understand what triggered it. Yeah, I had that very bad experience from work, but it was my wife's sister that, because I said, "Oh, no, I'm not worth it. I'm useless," and all that sort of thing. But it was her saying that we do care that tipped me over the edge. It logically, it shouldn't be. It should have been somebody saying something maybe unpleasant. But when you have such a low opinion of yourself, somebody's bigging you up, saying that you are worth something. Probably it should be the thing you want to hear. But sometimes it's the last thing you want to hear, because you're so convinced yourself that you're worthless. So and that's why I did it. And I could hear my son crying in the background. He said, "No, what are you doing? What are you doing all this for?" Silly. And then this voice in my head saying, "No, pick yourself up from this. Don't." We have this saying, and unfortunately it involves a swear word, but I would say, don't let the bastards grind you down. In other words, don't let people get you down. And that made me realise that if I'd done this, not only would I have left my wife and my son bereft, but also the people that didn't like me had won. So there's that element of stubbornness of saying, now it's also autism, to say, no, you're not going to win this one. I'm better than you. No matter, even though at the moment I don't feel like it, because I haven't treated anybody else like this, even if I don't feel good about myself. So that was the pickup. And the second major time, although it didn't involve that serious a breakdown, if you like that, was when we were put into child protection because we were told 1 year by our social services to push for a diagnosis of autism for the children. And the next year, the same people that told us to do that were then criticising us for doing the same thing, because she was behaving fine at school but exploding at home. So as far as they were concerned, there was no evidence of autism in school, although when she was assessed properly a few years later, they could say, yes, there was, fixed grin, swallow all the time, just keeping her head down and not actually communicating with anybody in class, withdrawing. So it's because of that, we ended up in child protection. But as a result of that, I ended up being diagnosed. So even from that, a positive thing's coming out. And at the moment, I'm campaigning because I know 15 years down the line, there are still autistic parents or parents of autistic children that are being routinely accused of abuse when all they've done is ask for help. And my logical autism brain says, well, if you're abusing a kid, why would you ask for help from the very people that could take your kids away from you? It doesn't. That's the last people. If you wouldn't ask for the police to check you out if you were committing a crime. It's logic says that's the last thing you would do. But they don't seem to understand all that. But so I'm trying to raise awareness of that, and it's difficult because a lot of parents don't want to put their head above the parapet. But my kids are growing up now, so it doesn't really matter. But I think it needs to be said, and hopefully things will change. So, and again, that's a big autistic thing that strive for social justice. That's, I thought, rather than, and we all do it, we all moan about stuff, we all moan about our governments or moan about climate, whatever. But it's taken, for climate change, it's took a teenaged Swedish girl to do more.
Yes.
Whatever your opinions on Greta Thunberg, it took a teenage autistic Asperger girl to actually say the things that all the politicians were too scared to say because they didn't want to offend anybody. And she's of the generation that's going to be living through the damage that our generation has caused. You know, she has. They're the people that have to be part of the solution, because they're the ones going to be living in the consequences of whatever happens. And some of the arguments is about politics and things like that. It's just not logical, is it? You know, if you spent more money on alternatives, then the world's economy would improve, because eventually we're going to run out of a lot of these resources anyway. So does it make sense to have alternatives now than before? You know, if for example they were running out of food in Germany, you wouldn't wait until there was no food left before you started thinking about what we're going to put in the food cupboard. You know, but that is what's the world is doing, isn't it? In effect, it's saying, well, oh, it's okay. It's going to happen in 20 years' time. It's not going to affect our generation. But what about your children, your grandchildren? You know, and we're already seeing a lot of social unrest anyway. We do really want a world war caused by climate change and poverty and all that sort of thing. We've had enough of that in the past, haven't we?
Yes, we had. David, give us an advice. Let's say people who are listening to this podcast, an advice how to deal with all the challenges that are connected with this pandemic.
Yeah, there's been some research, a lot of research done on this, how it's affecting autistic people. And again, like I mentioned to you earlier, sometimes because autistic people are generally quite happy in their own company, some of the issues of the pandemic haven't necessarily been so bad for some autistic people as they have for others. For instance, if you don't have much of a social life, not having one, or having that taken away from you forcibly through lockdown or other measures, isn't really an issue. If you don't like hugging and you're not allowed to because of COVID, bonus, but but then there's the other side of it, the constant bombardment. I mean, in the UK, I don't know if it's the same as Germany, we get told daily deaths every single day of how many people have died that day, and that drip feed, you either get desensitized with it or you start thinking it's a dangerous thing, but you start thinking it's never ending. It's really, you can get quite depressed if you're not careful, and particularly if you're autistic and you're thinking logic, you're not understanding, well, yeah, there's 200 people died this week, but a year ago it was 1,000. So you have to think, it's terrible, but we are winning the battle. It's just not, but it's going to be a long haul. So I think a lot of that, and I know of my daughter, she became very, very scared of going out, and everybody has to wear a mask when she's going anywhere and all this sort of thing, although she doesn't have to because she's autistic. There were certain restrictions, but you almost become paranoid because you're hearing it's such a terrible thing, and I know it has been, but it's kind of like, but the confusion that our government particularly has done has been terrible. It's like my son's autistic, and he's also a school teacher, and last year was training. He was being told things like he wouldn't know until 8 o'clock on a Monday morning if his school was open or closed, because the government hadn't decided whether to shut schools or not. It'd been mentioned on a Friday, and what happened was the UK government decided on Saturday, definitely not closing the schools. Then Sunday evening, we're going to close them all. Why last minute? It's that sort of confusion, that sort of lack of logic that confuses everybody. But people are autistic, the changing rules all the time is really, really, really confusing. And if you're autistic and have a certain amount of paranoia to you, then that's come really to the fore, because you also haven't got the skills to deal with that. So but then again, some people that are autistic are stoic and think, well, this is terrible, but we lived through the war, we lived through pandemics before, a bit like the older generation think, and maybe the other side of it, think, well, some people are becoming more kinder to one another, but I think some of that now is gone because it's been going on too long. There's a bit of kindness fatigue now, I think, and that doesn't help. So it's a complex situation to be in, and it's I'm 55 and I've been nothing as confusing as this or dramatic as this has ever happened, and and it's a scary time. But what I can say is that for autistic people, we just like answers. And of course, sometimes with something like this, there isn't any. But again, we need a plan, you know. And one thing I don't know the situation in Germany, but I know historically Germans are much more pragmatic and much more
planned.
Much more planned. Think with a head. The fact that you recovered from 2 world wars, you know, when you were decimated financially, because you know how to work hard, you know how to, and British people don't have that strong work ethic, and we don't have the, you know, we may complain about the government, but we don't think practically how to fix a problem. It's like whatever it's their fault. You know, some of it is their fault, but it's always somebody's fault, rather than thinking, well, yeah, we can't change what they do, but we can change our own little corner. You know, we can make sure that we help our children, that we work with the schools to keep them open. You know, don't leave it all to everybody else.
So maybe, David, I can put everything together that maybe we should start in Europe to take the best sides of all of us and to bring these talents and cultural differences together, and then maybe even reach out further, because in a way it might be the only way out.
Yeah, I believe so, and even though I vote for it, I don't think Brexit's been necessarily has helped. But I think it's kind of like it's always been us and Europe. We've always been part of Europe, even when we were in the EEC. But we're an island. But we forget, that we still rely on everybody else. You know, you still have to have goods come in. You still have to have a good relationship with your neighbours, France, Germany. You know, and it's fair enough saying, well, we could have stronger relations with Australia and Canada, but they are thousands of miles away. You know, they're not the ones that are going to send the trolley loads of food if we run out of or medicines, because by the time they get it could be too late. You know, we rely on our neighbours and they rely on us, and that spirit of cooperation. And in a global situation, countries should work together, not just think about their own well-being, because that doesn't achieve anything. That's just causes chaos. You know, and it's a chance for everyone to shine, but I don't think they are really. There's countries that are like New Zealand where they've really seem to, but it's easier for them. Small country in the middle of nowhere.
but having good connections to Australia and Canada might help sometimes.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have the Brexit, but maybe we have a reunion between the UK and Europe in some years, and let's hope for that. And,
I think they should have just had maybe with regards to trade, but still had free movement of workers, because it's crazy. Like they suddenly stopped a lot of free movement of work, and then what's happening is that, you know, part of the problem with Brexit, people were complaining about Romanian drivers coming over and taking all our British jobs, but now they're asking for them to come over because we haven't got enough lorry drivers. You know, so it's kind of like, well, you've created your own problem, and it's like anything. It's like they had a vote, and they always expected it was going to be a certain outcome. Whereas I think if a person that's maybe autistic would logically think there's 2 possible outcomes. You have to plan for both. They always thought the answer was going to be no to Brexit, so they hadn't planned for if it was a yes. Well, you can't make any debate like that. There's always a chance that, you know, the public will say something different. You know, you give them that option. It's like the ballot box, and you can never be certain what people are going to say. So it's but there we go. It's but it is such a shame, because the countries aren't really working together, and there's that, and I fear that there may be a rise in nationalism in the next few years if something isn't changed. That we'll become Little England, you know, harking back to a time that really never was, you know, when we were the ruler of the waves and all this sort of thing, and we can't take the clock back. We can't have our empire back, because there are no empires really now. You know, it should be more, well, let's work with our neighbours, let's work together. That's the only way the pandemic's going to go is through global cooperation. It's the only way climate change is going to go if all countries work together. And it's no good ourselves or Germany if we recycled 100% and had zero carbon. That won't work if China's polluting and America's polluting still. But it shouldn't stop us as individuals doing it. But one person can't go against billions, which is what it is at the moment.
So let's say at least we are two. I mean, like, I'm not perfect with everything concerning climate, but it's a little start. And I think we have so many others in our big boat. And I take your last words as a warning and as an attempt to call for unity of people everywhere, especially in Europe.
Yeah.
And I will switch to German now. Ja, ich habe damit jetzt geschlossen, wie natürlich alle im Prinzip verstanden haben, weil die allermeisten hier ja sowieso Englisch verstehen. Ich habe damit geschlossen, dass David weniger mit einem Tipp gekommen ist, wie man diese Pandemie am besten überleben kann, beziehungsweise dann doch. Also ich glaube, es war vor allen Dingen eine Mahnung, diese Pandemie super ernst zu nehmen und bestimmte Schwierigkeiten, mit denen die Menschheit auch noch zu kämpfen hat, die jetzt wirklich anzugehen. Und ich glaube, das haben sowieso schon viele verstanden. Aber es gab ganz viel Tolles, Interessantes zum Thema Autismus. Und ich bedanke mich nochmal bei dir, David. Und wir, liebe Podcast-Hörer, hören uns in 2 Wochen wieder. Und dann habe ich wieder einen interessanten Podcast-Gast. Mal sehen, ob es ein Experte ist oder sonst irgendwie ein Mensch, der durch eine Krise gegangen ist und sowohl von der Krisenerfahrung berichtet, als auch möglicherweise schon von den guten Seiten. Das ist aber nicht immer und jeden Tag erkennbar. Aber trotzdem lasst uns einigermaßen fröhlich gestimmt sein. Und wir gehen ja jetzt auch auf Weihnachten zu. Und von daher bis in 2 Wochen. Alles Gute. Tschüss.